I'm a practice manager here at Pragmatic Works. I'm formerly a TSP at Microsoft, Teradata, Information Builders, and Informatica. So I have a lot of background in data warehousing and BI. And today we'll be talking about on-premise versus cloud and which is the right decision. How do you go about looking at making those decisions, and what could potentially be best for your organization when going through and trying to evaluate which strategy should you take. You know, and today versus even 5 years ago, and certainly 10 years ago, the world's changing. Data is growing at an exorbitant rate. Studies say that it could be by 2020 44 zettabytes. A lot of organizations are, because of data growth, are struggling whether to adopt some sort of on-premise or cloud strategy. And the reason is at some point when you start looking at one of the first roadblocks is, do you want to be in the hardware business and software business, or do you kind of want to eliminate that with your organization altogether and just kind of move into the cloud and have somebody else control the infrastructure for you? When you're kind of looking at that decision and trying to understand what you want to do, it's really understanding the cloud. In the cloud, there's really two methods of being in the cloud. It's not all of a sudden as a company you make that decision, hey, I'm going to the cloud and I'm there and everything's great. As an organization, you have to look at it from an IaaS perspective, which is infrastructure as a service, or a PaaS perspective, which is platform as a service. And as data is growing and you're trying to understand as a company your growth rate, you're starting to look at, when I go to the cloud, which decision do I make? Do I go IaaS? Do I go PaaS? And the difference really between the two is, from an IaaS perspective, that's where you go and say, okay, I don't want to buy hardware anymore, but I certainly want to be in control of my software. So from a virtual machine perspective, I'm going to get rid of hardware. I'm going to go to a virtual machine. I'm going to place all of my software into the cloud, and I am still going to manage it from a security perspective. So from an IaaS perspective, when you're in the cloud, you are totally managing your environment as you would from an on-prem perspective, but you're no longer dealing with hardware and infrastructure. You're totally implementing that into the cloud. From a PaaS perspective, you're totally eliminating the management of software and hardware, and you're allowing the cloud provider to manage and help manage your security for you. So when you're going through and understanding, making those decisions, you have to understand which direction you're taking. A lot of the things that you've heard in the past about some of the target breaches and other of these cloud breaches have come from an IaaS perspective, where organizations have put their infrastructure in the cloud, their security practices weren't up to par. There were some security breaches in their environment, and people were able to get in and get access to their data. Where from a PaaS perspective, if you use a PaaS or software as a service infrastructure like a Salesforce or a ServiceNow, you don't really hear those security breaches. So it is much more secure from a PaaS environment being in the cloud than it could potentially be from an infrastructure as a service, especially when you're the one that's in charge of your own security and you're still implementing your security practices as you would from an on-prem perspective. So understanding the two differences between what infrastructure as a service and platform as a service when making that cloud decision, if you're going that route, is a really fundamental decision you have to make, whether you want to stay on-prem or move into the cloud. And then, because a lot of companies are investing in artificial intelligence and machine learning, today there's a lot of cloud solutions that help make artificial intelligence easier to implement. Companies like Microsoft and Google that go through and have models already created for you that are sitting in the cloud, that are easy for you to use, where they've had the data to test it and give you integration into those services, help make that fundamental decision of, do I move into the cloud, potentially a little bit easier, because you don't necessarily have to pay a lot of data scientists to start creating a lot of models, or as you pay your data scientists, you have a lot of templates that are already created and built for you. The cloud infrastructure is there, a lot of the setups ready to use. So being able to start taking advantage of AI is starting to push a lot of people to the cloud, because there's a lot of software and and processes that are already pre-built that as you're forming your BI infrastructure, you can use to take advantage of rather than having to build yourself. So these are all a lot of factors as you're starting to take your journey and decide, do I want to move into the cloud? Do I want to stay on-prem? You have to start thinking about. And I always kind of like to start with to move into or why do we want to stay on-prem or move to a cloud strategy? And it's really to build your business intelligence environment. And as you're building your business intelligence environment, it's really broken down into three factors. It's broken down into visual reporting and visualization, data movement, and data containment. And data containment is the big fundamental piece behind will bring you an 89% return on your investment according to this IDC study. And what that really means from a business intelligence standpoint is, as you bring your data together from the disparate data sources and you historically can understand your business and make retroactive decisions, you're able to kind of cure or subject problems and fix those, or you're able to understand what you've done successfully and try to build on them further. But it's always from a historical perspective. I kind of like to use this home loan customer that I worked with. We were helping them build their data warehouse, and we were bringing data into their environment, and they were starting to look at their business from a whole. And from a business intelligence standpoint, they always knew from a home loan perspective who their top loan agent was. Year after year, she had won numerous awards, got numerous bonuses, and she was a rock star within that company. And as the housing market was beginning to deplete, they were starting to think about layoffs and things that they could do to restructure their business. And they had a pretty good idea of who they could potentially lay off. They knew that their superstar rep maybe could help carry a lot of the slack if they did downsize. And so as they were building out their business intelligence environment, they were bringing these different data sources together. And one of the things they've never looked at in the past was, from a loan perspective, what was the default loan rate compared to each loan officer. And as they brought the data in during the POC process and they were beginning to look at things into their data warehouse, they noticed that that superstar agent that had traditionally done very well, one of the things they never looked at from a business intelligence standpoint was that she had the largest default loan rate within the company. 70% of her loans were defaulting. And some of the people that they were considering laying off or downsizing at the bottom tier percent were actually the top loan agents in their company, because though they hadn't signed as many loans or made as much money, these three people were less than 1% at their loan defaults. So looking at that from a historical business intelligence and loan perspective, they were able to gain insights by bringing the data together into a data warehouse and see from a historical perspective, we thought our superstar loan agent was our number one loan producer in the company. But when we dug into the data, we were able to see, okay, she really wasn't, and we almost tragically laid off people that may not had been deserved to be laid off. When you start getting into combining business intelligence with predictive modeling, as you see, to get that 145% return on investment, how that's working. So if I gave you the story about business intelligence, what they could have done by bringing in predictive modeling was, now that they know that their loan process has some issues in it, building models to maybe predict who not to give loans to based off certain criteria, whether it's age, income, certain factors. They can use those models and predict, okay, from business intelligence, maybe we would give a loan here and this was a bad loan, but now if we can predict which loans could be bad and head off writing bad loans before it even happens, we can now make decisions earlier that would benefit the business, where the business would not lose money. So combining the two efforts will allow you to gain more value out of your business intelligence infrastructure. And by doing so and bringing all the disparate data sources together in the data warehouse and having pragmatic work to do things like help you choose whether it's an on-prem strategy or a cloud strategy and how to bring the data together and create these models and build out your environment is one of the things that we can do as an organization to help you make these decisions. And as you're making these decisions, you have to start looking at your business from a data warehouse perspective. Okay, if I'm going on-prem and on the cloud, and you're starting to take that journey, you have to look at your environment and say, where am I at the analytical maturity curve? From the analytical maturity curve, what this really states is, okay, basic reporting. I have these disparate data sources, and each of my disparate data sources has traditional reporting. My sales system, I can report off of, and I can see what sales were yesterday. Marketing, I can see what my marketing data was yesterday. Finance, human resources, they're all individual systems that I can look at and I can see reporting. Once you have basic reporting in hands, you can then move up the second bubble, which is self-service reporting, where I'm actually bringing different data sources together. So maybe I'm able to bring sales and marketing together, where I can see that this sales campaign was successful, or the sales campaign wasn't successful with marketing, and I can make decisions whether or not to keep this marketing campaign because sales was good or sales was bad based off what we learned at this marketing event. The third bubble is the data warehouse bubble, and that bubble explains to, now that I've got one or more systems together, I can now bring 3 systems together, 4 systems together. I bring everything together so I can get that 360-degree view of my organization. And this is kind of the most difficult bubble to be at, because a lot of people think once they're at the data warehouse bubble and they build out their data warehouse, they're easy to go into 4th and 5th bubble, which are predictive and prescriptive analytics. But this is the bubble here where you're actually truly planning out your data warehouse, making decisions like, do I go on-prem, do I go cloud? If I'm going cloud, do I go IaaS, do I go PaaS? What's my data growth rate? What's my data quality like? If I'm growing data, you know, if I'm growing a terabyte of data every year and I go with an on-prem strategy, how much hardware do I have to buy to implement an on-premise model? Where if I'm choosing the cloud, I can start at a level that's great for my organization with the data that I have, and as I grow, I can scale up. But what data sources do I have today that is it an easy transition to the cloud? Can I take my SQL Server 2012 environment and immediately go into the Azure cloud with how it is in place? Or what processes do I have to do to make it cloud ready? So sometimes there in the middle, you may have to take a hybrid approach. So when you're analyzing your environment and you're at that data warehouse bubble, it's very important to start asking these questions. If you have a traditional or old environment that's using something like DB2 with data stage jobs, and you're really wanting to move to the cloud, being able to understand not only can my data stage jobs work in a PaaS environment with something like Azure DW, if Azure's the cloud provider I choose, or maybe you're looking at an Amazon cloud approach and you have a lot of data stage jobs, okay, how does that work with the Amazon environment? Does the cloud provider I choose work with the current technology that I have? And if not, maybe I need to take some sort of hybrid approach because of the cloud provider I'm choosing, not necessarily working with the technology that we're wanting to use. And it seems like a lot to be thrown at, but that as you're at this analytical maturity curve, understanding where you're at from a reporting standpoint, and you're truly going in and trying to make these decisions about your data warehouse, the ultimate goal is to getting to predictive and prescriptive analytics, which is that 4th or 5th bubble, where you're able to do things like I talked about in that loan example to predict, okay, these are the loans I shouldn't write, and these are the loans I should write. Another example I have is I worked with a large retail organization, and the number one thing they were looking at was that they really badly wanted to be in the cloud. It was from a security standpoint. They knew they liked the security processes around the cloud. They liked the fact that they could spend as they grew, as their BI environment got more mature. They could add things like machine learning and different types of models and different types of ETL from a perspective as they grew. They didn't have to buy it all at once, but within their environment, they were on, as I kind of talked about earlier, some older data stage. They had, or they were, I'm sorry, old Netezza. They had some older Oracle. They were on a little more current SQL Server environment. So they had very different data sources that needed to be moved into the cloud, where the approach that they were wanting to take didn't necessarily say, okay, I can get in there right away with the schemas being able to be moved over into the PaaS data warehouse that they were choosing. And it just wasn't a one-to-one conversion to go right into the cloud. So the strategy they had to take was more of a hybrid approach, where they moved some of their data as they wanted to go to Azure DW into a more current environment of SQL Server. So they took this hybrid approach where, yes, they went in there as an IaaS perspective, got their data into the cloud from an infrastructure as a service. They updated all of their technology, and as they got settled and they got their technology updated and situated, they were then able to start increasingly move themselves into a more PaaS perspective by taking the new jobs that were coming in, going into Azure DW, and then slowly and concisely convert themselves, what was older, that's now moved into newer technology, and start moving that into Azure DW. So it was all about the approach that they had to take to get there, and they had to go through a very detailed list of understanding their environment and understanding what it took to get them to that end game, rather than saying, okay, our third bubble is data warehousing. We're just going to say go to the cloud, and we're going to undertake this multi-million-dollar project and just start moving everything into the cloud, and let's see what happens. From that standpoint, that kind of planning would have been a disaster, and they would have found out that their environment wasn't necessarily ready for a PaaS perspective. So it's really taking the time as you're making these decisions of not saying, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it right away, but understanding what your long-term goal is. And then as you're moving through your journey, breaking down your environment into sections and technology, and what is cloud ready or what isn't cloud ready. Or we have other organizations that at some point want to go to the cloud, but at this point, based off of financial security rules and things that are in place, need them to stay on-prem. So as they built out their data warehouse environment, and we looked at the analytical maturity curve, we built out this on-prem strategy, and we built out an on-prem data warehouse that would then prepare them when things change and when models change, and when the financial environment their financial laws within their organization would allow their environment to go to the cloud, to then help them create that journey and give them the hooks to easily transform into the cloud when they are ready. And these are all things that you have to look at, because within your organization, your IT staff may be ready to go to the cloud, but you guys may not, your company with its laws and rules and processes may not allow you to go to the cloud. So as you're going through and you're looking at how to make those decisions, as you notice, I'm throwing up a non-technical architect, or I'm throwing up an architecture slide here that is not technology specific. And this is the map I always use with customers to decide, okay, how do we make these decisions? How do we define our processes in moving our data, whether it's in an on-prem environment or it's in a cloud environment? And one of the things I always work with customers to do is, if you look at this line down here on the left, I always take the time as we're planning. First, we look at the analytical maturity curve, and we decide, where we're at, what that data warehouse stage looks like. And as an organization, we figure out how do we move them up the chain, whether they're at basic reporting, or they're at the data warehousing stage, or if they're ready to go predictive or prescriptive. Here is where we break it down and say, okay, as an organization, what are your individual data sources that you have that you can replace here? I put generic terms here: ERP, CRM, maybe they have social media data, but we take the time, and as an organization, this is an exercise you could do to take the time to break out. How many Oracle databases do you have? How many SQL databases do you have? How much unstructured data do you have, like, flat files and CSV files, Excel? How do you have any, if you're a hospital, do you have X-ray images that you need to compare to structured data? And you define out this process first. And once you define out the type of systems you have and the versions and what types of technologies you're compatible with. The next phase is the ETL, and that's what the arrows represent. The arrows represents the ETL. So how do you take the transactional data that you have today and you push it into and move it into potentially an integrated data warehouse, a data platform, which is a data lake, which at that point now from an ETL perspective, you're deciding, do I want an ELT strategy or do I want an ETL strategy? Meaning, do I want to push the data from the transactional systems first into a data lake where I do all the data quality, data cleaning, and master data management first, get it ready for reporting, and then push it into my integrated data warehouse for reporting? Or do I want to take the data and push it into my integrated data warehouse and I do all the transformations, cleaning, and master data management here? That is another strategy that you have to define before you even make that decision while you're making that decision between on-prem and the cloud, because these are going to tell you the decisions of what types of cloud technology am I going to need, what type of on-premise technology you're going to need, and helps you start evaluating cost. So then what you see here to complete this, technically, if you're an organization like Walmart per se, or you're an organization like Best Buy, you may have something that says, okay, I'm going to push my data into a data lake where I'm going to do all my transformations. I'm going to give my data scientists access to do exploratory work, and then I push that data into my integrated data warehouse for reporting. Now, eventually, as we saw in that first slide, data is growing at exorbitant amount of rate. So at some point, you may have so much data that you can't put your statistical models onto your data lake or integrated data warehouse along with processing the data and having all that high concurrent users. So you may need to have some sort of machine that will allow you to run those statistical models. So maybe you push the data into your data lake. Your data scientists are doing work looking for data that they could use as hypothesis. They then push it over to an environment that does and processes and runs all your statistical models and does the heavy lifting. And if that hypothesis is true, it could be pushed up into the integrated data warehouse for structured reporting, or if that's false, then the data goes back and more science work is done. This infrastructure is this is what would happen if you have a lot of data and you just kind of outgrow everything. I kind of like to talk about my house. When I first got married, I had my bachelor pad and I had the different things within my house. And when my wife came in as we got married, and she had the holiday stuff and the different wardrobes and things of that nature, I kind of outgrew my house, but didn't necessarily want to purchase another one at that particular time. So I ended up having to get a storage unit. I wasn't able to do all three at once as I was in the beginning. At some point I grew and I needed to expand to my storage unit. And as I even outgrew that, I may even needed to go and use my garage. So data kind of works the same thing. As an organization, you don't have to go and buy 3 data warehouses to do all 3 things in the beginning. One data warehouse, a simple SQL Server database or a simple Azure SQL database may work until you grow and outgrow this. And as you're growing as an organization, you could then push out into an implementation where you're using 2 boxes, or if your data changes and you're an oil company using IoT data and you're a doctor company using x-rays where you have truly unstructured data, you may need to implement 2 boxes in the beginning. And then as you get to a company the size of Walmart, this is when your infrastructure starts to grow and become more detailed and a little bit more expensive. This final box here is the reporting, and this is where you go in, and once you have your data warehouse environment set up, that's when you attach the business intelligence, the BI tools like the Tableaus and the Power BIs, and you're able to get that detailed reporting. But going through and mapping out your environment and understanding, okay, here are my transactional sources. Am I going to do ETL versus ELT? Do I have structured data, unstructured data that I need to necessarily put into a data lake? Do I want to do an ELT perspective where I do my transformations in a staging area and then push my data warehouse? These are all things, as you're understanding and trying to make those decisions within your environment, that you have to plan out to make that cloud versus on-premise decision. Because potentially, if you're going on-prem and you decide, well, you know what, I need a staging area, potentially you need a staging box and you need a data warehouse box. So this could potentially be some form of, in the Microsoft world, which is where I come from, blob storage or data lake. This could be Azure DW. And then from that perspective, in the cloud, you have to decide, okay, what does that cost me per month, as opposed of, okay, am I going to buy some sort of data lake on-prem? Am I going to buy my SQL Server environment on-prem? How much does that cost? Do I have the right licensing? From an on-premise strategy with my ETL, that comes within the SQL Server Enterprise Studio. So if I have the right type of licensing from a cost perspective, I may be able to get an advantage of cloud if I've already paid for these licensing. But then if you're growing at a rate where you might not be able to support those licenses because you're growing, and then as you need to upgrade because new software comes out, what do those consulting costs look like? These are all things that you need to break down and help decide. Not just, do I want a cloud, do I want an on-prem strategy? You have to look at the return on investment on your business. What do you already own on-prem? What do you need to buy? What technologies are you currently on that if you are going to go on cloud or stay on-prem, that you need to move to or get your environment ready to make those decisions? It's not just an easy decision to say, I'm moving to the cloud, or I am staying on-prem. Everything has a major cost associated with it. And as you're going through this journey, having somebody go through with you, whether it's somebody you've hired or a consulting company that comes in that's working with you, to break down your environment by technology, by the transactional systems that you have, by the data that's structured, how much unstructured data do you have that needs to be integrated with structured data for reporting. Your ETL process, is the ETL process that you're doing now, where is the business logic built in? Is it built in at the database level? Is it built in at the ETL level? All these things, believe it or not, that may not seem like things you need to think about before you're making this, do I make this decision to move to cloud, or do I make the decision to go to on-prem, or things that you have to think about, because if you don't, the expenses that are tied to this, without planning these things out first, can take the project, create a lot of scope creep, and drive what could be a fairly reasonable price project and make it a project that kind of is one of those where cost gets out of control, and sometimes those projects get scrapped. It's at the planning stage. It's not at the decision stage that data warehousing, do I go cloud or go on-prem? Do these things fail? It's at the planning stage of understanding your environment, is where about 75% of all data warehousing projects fail. So kind of once you go through and you've kind of mapped out your environment, and like I said, what I traditionally do with customers, I map out their transactional systems. We map out what their ETL or ELT process looks like. We understand what it looks like from do I have unstructured data, or do I do my transformations here at the data lake, or do I do my transformations at the reporting level? And we understand how things are going to be built from a pure non-technology perspective. And then we break it out, and because I do work with them, I am with Pragmatic Works, Microsoft is my background. I'm showing you Microsoft technology. If you guys are customers looking at other cloud providers, the same process could be worked in the same realm. I'm just using the Microsoft ecosystem to explain with most of the customers how we work with. Once again, you have this same screen, and from that standpoint, you have all your transactional systems. But now what you're doing from this world in a Microsoft perspective, you're breaking it down to, okay, how do I make this decision? Do I want to stay on-prem with SQL Server, or do I want to break things down into the Azure world? And one of the nice things about Microsoft being one of the better cloud providers, they are truly, from a PaaS perspective, a provider that will allow you to do the same things on-prem that you can do in the cloud. And if you kind of look at this diagram, it explains it. If you need, if you want to start at the basic level of data warehousing, where you can use it, from a cost perspective, where you can use, for example, SQL Server as your traditional data warehouse, until you grow past the 4 terabytes of data and need to move into a more traditional data warehouse, you can, and you can do that one for one within SQL Server to Azure SQL Database. As you begin to grow, you then may need to move into a more data warehouse. You may need to move into that more traditional data warehouse. And from a Microsoft perspective, you can move into a data warehouse from both on-prem and cloud strategies. And then if you need to implement some form of that unstructured type of data lake box, Microsoft has an environment too. So they are one of the true vendors that will allow you to do one-for-one Azure, making that decision that if I want to stay on-prem, but I don't want to lose a lot of the functionality that is offered, as far as starting small in a transactional database, moving high to a data warehouse, and then expanding out to a data lake. The Microsoft has them both from an on-prem and PaaS perspective. So as you're making that decision, not only as one of the cloud providers is who to choose from, those are things to think about. Can Amazon do the same thing from their cloud? Can Oracle and IBM and Google do the same thing for their cloud? Do they have technology that if you wanted to start out on-prem first and then have those hooks and move to the cloud, how easy is it? Do they have the technology that will allow you to grow? If I'm on SQL Server and I wanted to move to Azure, there is a data migration assistant that will allow me to move from SQL Server to Azure really easily. And then if I'm in Azure and I want to move to a data warehouse, that process I don't have to undertake a new process to move from Azure SQL to Azure Data Warehouse. It's a fairly easy conversion plan. It's not necessarily a new project undertaking and having to start all over. And that's really important, because if you're starting out on-prem and you have a decision you want to go to the cloud in the next 10 years, can you take your environment without undertaking a whole new project? And is it easy to move to the cloud? And with Microsoft, it's a very easy path. I can grow down, or I can grow across and move down. And so that from choosing from a cloud provider, that's one of the decisions you have to look at, because at some point, as we saw in the poll, everybody either is looking to move to the cloud or has a little bit of the cloud. And can you keep the project costs down with either having to hire staff internally or having to hire consultants to help you grow and move your environment from an on-prem perspective into the cloud without having to undertake a lot of new projects? And then you can see all the reporting capabilities that Microsoft has within their ecosystem. And that's another thing, as we talked about trying to get predictive and prescriptive. Microsoft allows you to integrate with Machine Learning Studio and Power BI, or you can, within SQL Data Warehouse, within SQL Server, you do have R and Python studios that it integrates with. And it has all the technologies you need within one environment to grow up the analytical maturity curve to get predictive and prescriptive. And then a lot of companies want to know, as if they're undertaking the Azure environment, do they have truly a data lake and big data perspective that they can grow with for unstructured data? And simply, if you're looking at making that on-prem versus cloud decision, and big data is a part of it, and you're looking at the Azure environment, can Microsoft handle it? They absolutely can. And as you can see, this is from the Azure Marketplace or from SQL Server Studio, they can build out a true data lake with open source technology. So choosing a strategy and what's best for you. So as I talked about all the decision factors that you need to take into account, these are some of the things that kind of I like to use with customers to have them kind of look at visually and kind of help them make that decision. From an on-prem environment, you basically have a dedicated cost. You have to buy the machines, you have to buy the licenses, you have to implement all the security and practices and everything from that perspective. As you move up this, everything is 100% on you, the business, to purchase, implement, and be in charge of. If you start thinking, okay, I want more of a hybrid approach, what does that look like? So a hybrid approach is saying, okay, maybe I'm going to get rid of and just stay out of the hardware business. And from staying out of the hardware business means I don't want to buy machines anymore. I want to go and strictly use my security practices. I want to use all of our software licenses. And so I'm going to use my software licenses, but I'm going to rent out virtual machines. So there, you're now starting to split the cost, because at that standpoint, you're renting the virtual machines, and you're not paying for the software licenses. So at that point, if in the Microsoft world, if you have the licenses and you're able to, you're now just paying your maintenance fees for what those yearly costs are. You're basically paying for machine rental. Stay on that IaaS perspective, and you don't want to get into the hardware software business. You then start to say, okay, I'm not going to buy software anymore. I'm not going to buy machines anymore. I still want on-prem software where I'm renting the licenses and I'm renting the infrastructure. I'm just not paying for anything. At this point, that is kind of like renting a house. You are truly renting everything, and technically that can technically be a little more expensive. You're purchasing or you're renting. One customer I dealt with, they decided they didn't want to be in the hardware and software business, so they rented everything in the Microsoft ecosystem. And I'm not going to use real numbers, but I'm going to use numbers that are, kind of close. Their yearly bill was about $500,000 based off how much SQL Server they were renting, how much Windows they were renting, based off all the different products they were renting. And at that point, they were happy not to be in the hardware and software business, but they were looking at their costs saying, this is kind of expensive. And as I worked with them and uncovered what they were trying to do and why they didn't want to be in the hardware and software business, I realized, I told them, hey, at some point, with as much as you're renting and what you're trying to do, maybe this isn't the best strategy for you. I get it, you want to be in the cloud. I get it that you're, with purchasing and everything else, this isn't the best method you want to take. But from a cost perspective, if you were to just rent the VMs and you were to purchase the SQL licenses and the Windows licenses based off what you're doing, that would cost you about $1 million. So in 2 years, what you spend in $1 million, and then on those other years, you're in the green, because in the scenario one that you're already doing, you're paying $500,000 a year until you decide to do something else. So when we broke it down and looked at it from that perspective, we thought that, you know what, for this particular organization, it made sense just to rent the VMs and purchase software and kind of invest in kind of having to deal with software and the software buying process until it made sense for them to go to a pure platform as a service solution, where at this case, you're not in the hardware or the software business. You're not in any business but saying, hey, I want to just turn it on and begin using it. I want security to be done by my cloud provider, and I just want to pay as I go. And at this point, this does become kind of a cost advantage, because you can start small, and this is what allows a company as a mom and pop shop to get started and grow into a Walmart, because they can start small. It can cost them as little as $14 a month, and as they grow, they can dial up their CPU and their infrastructure, and they can make their data warehouse bigger. And as they grow, they incur more costs. And if for some reason they have less data, they can shrink back down, and it doesn't reflect their bottom line. So when you're kind of choosing these strategies, you have to map out and really understand what the prices of the software is, what the prices of hardware is, and then what's the price is it going to cost you if you are a PaaS environment. Is it something that your organization allows you to do? And these are the factors that you have to look at and discuss as you're moving and choosing that strategy. So as you can see, at least from an Azure perspective, these are the different solution paths that you can take. More of that, as we talked about, that IaaS perspective, where you're in full control and you have that full flexibility. Or do you go that platform as a service, where it's simplified administration, but you don't have to manage operating systems, VMs, you don't have to manage the whole infrastructure, but does your organization allow you to do this? And when you start going through and asking yourselves these questions, the decision whether you move to the cloud or stay on-prem starts to become pretty clear as you're going through and you're mapping out your organization's environment. And then what I always like to say is, what's important when kind of choosing your path is to realize, and I kind of briefly touched on this earlier, is if you're going to stay on-prem, and that's the decision you make, but you have a long-term cloud strategy, are you on the right software, and are you choosing the right software provider or cloud provider that will allow you to have the migration tools and services in place to easily go from an on-prem environment into the cloud? And from a Microsoft perspective, that's one of the nice things about their cloud environment, because it is one for one. You're able to do, hey, if I start with on-prem and I want to go to the cloud, I'm able to migrate my schemas and features and do all my conversions into Azure using their migration assistant solutions. And when picking a cloud provider, and if you are starting on-prem and you want to move to the cloud, these are the things I would think about and ask your cloud provider as you're trying to make those decisions. So then, how do you implement these common data architectures? When you finally decide the path that you want to take, how do you truly understand if that decision you made is the best decision? And what I always tell companies is break it down into small POCs and break it down into bigger chunks. So if I were, once I've made my decision, whether it's to move on-prem or in the cloud, I would then start with a small environment. I would grab my transactional data sources. I would choose my ingestion process. If it's the cloud, it's going to be Azure Data Factory. If it's going to be on-prem from Microsoft, it's going to be SSIS. And then if I choose an ELT strategy where I'm going to do my transformations, then I'm going to probably choose something like blob storage or data lake in the cloud. I may use a SQL Server database as my transformation database on-prem, and then I could do my work and prep and the transformations with the data that I need. I can then put it into my data warehouse. And if I'm a smaller company on-prem, it could be a small SQL Server database. If I'm a larger company in the and I'm choosing the cloud, it could be Azure DW. The point is, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, Microsoft has the technologies for both that will allow you to easily make that decision and have that same path, and then you begin reporting. And from this standpoint, as you're standing up this basic environment and you just have that basic data warehousing reporting with basic ETL, your basic transformation layer, your basic data warehouse with your reporting, and you have that under control, and you've built this phase of your project. The second one is to move into what I like to call more modern data warehouse. Maybe this is where you start looking at some unstructured data. And so if you're going along this path and you're taking a major data warehouse project and you're trying to break it up into sections, especially to prove out your journey, do I go on-prem or in the cloud? This is where, okay, from a cloud perspective, this what makes it a little nicer. You only have to turn on different features. So maybe you're introducing something like Azure Databricks to do Spark type jobs. In the Microsoft world, if you're going to do a little bit of analytics here, you're going to use SQL Server R and Python integration services. In the Azure world, it's a feature that you can turn on and it's ready to go. In the on-prem world, it's a feature you may have to go back and install if it's not installed already. But as you can see, the technology works the same. So if you're introducing now unstructured data and you're following the paths, you have both paths gives you the path to the end to have your operational reporting with structured and unstructured data. One may be a little more work. If you're going on-prem, you may have to install a little more software and get that up and running and ensure you have the licenses for it. The other is just a simple feature that you turn on. And from a cost perspective, you kind of use it as you go, where on-prem it incurs, you have to buy it and you incur it. And then as you start moving up the analytical maturity curve, it's moving into more advanced analytics to where, once again, it's pieces of software that you turn on or pieces of software that you have to implement from an on-prem perspective. But from any case, it's something that you can do whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. Up until you get to real-time analytics, where now maybe you're something like Uber, where real-time analytics takes you along the journey where I'm getting my ride. And as I take that to tuition to where my ride says it's here and ready to go. But from an operational perspective, I still need to look at my data and I need to know how many rides did we get over the last month. the same journey. And as you can see, the technologies for on-prem or in the cloud or both, it's how do I implement that into smaller chunks and how do I prove out which solution's best for me, to the point where you can start building out intelligent applications to where, you know, I kind of like to use the Apple Watch. As they built their models for their analytical environment, one of the things they were able to do was take the models that they used and build it and use it into the Apple Watch for heart monitoring. So now the Apple Watch can tell you if you're an AFib, and there were simple models that they started with in their analytical environment that said, okay, you know what, now that we've built them for reporting, we could now turn them on and use them, because statistical models are statistical models. They had to make some changes to them, but they were able to take the models that they're using to predict certain things to use to kind of predict if someone's going into AFib. So it's nice. Once you have that stuff built, you can then start building applications around them as well. And I know that we're pushing at time, so I just kind of want to wrap things up with, at least around the business studio from a Microsoft perspective. We are a Microsoft partner. These, as far as choosing on cloud and on-prem or in the cloud, from at least a Microsoft perspective as a cloud provider, they do provide with the intelligence that will allow you to do both, to help you speed up applications and improve the process of going and creating your data warehouse. It provides security and scalability with both environments, and it is flexible to use different types of technology. If you want to use open source, you're allowed to do that in the cloud or on-prem. At this point, I've left about 6 minutes for questions. I went a little longer, but I'll kind of turn it over and kind of go through the questions as they're going to be read off to me.
All right, David, do you want me to read these off to you?
Yeah, please.
All right, perfect. Let's check it out here. Let's see what we have. All right, good morning, Kofi. Someone said private cloud, public cloud.
Oh, what's the difference?
I'm assuming so.
Yep. So a public cloud would be something like, Azure and, Amazon or Google, where you're going through and your data is shared on a cloud, is on the cloud. So if you think of your iPhone, for example, everybody is on the public cloud where their iPhone data is being stored in their space of that particular cloud. A private cloud, it'd be where if an organization has built a data center just for you, and your data is the only data sitting on that cloud's data center. So you share it with absolutely nobody. I know when I worked at Teradata, we used to do that for customers. They wanted their own private cloud, so we would stand up a box in a data center for them, and that box would be their own private box dedicated to their own cloud infrastructure.
All right, the next question is question regarding DW. Whereas our data is moving to unstructured, would you still suggest a traditional Kimball DW or perhaps more of an ODS?
Yeah, so I guess high level, as you're kind of moving to unstructured data, with not completely understanding the use case with more detail, which we could talk if you want to reach out to me. I would say high level, I would say maybe moving more. I think an ODS situation from there might be a little easier approach high level. Not to say that you couldn't use the traditional Kimball model, you could, but high level, it might be easier to move more to an ODS in that situation.
All right, the next question is, what would be a good strategy for working with the infrastructure teams that seems to be reluctant to what many consider the demise?
Working with the infrastructure teams to do what?
That seems to be reluctant to what many consider their demise.
Oh, because so one of the things I guess I would say would be if I'm understanding the question correct, would be the reason they're seeing it as their demise is because as a PaaS environment could potentially take their jobs because it's it's easy to maintain and deploy, and it allows it kind of doesn't have them have as much work or is needed. And a lot of times I would say working with, and that's not a true statement. Just because you go PaaS doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to need your infrastructure team. It's, for one, to move your data takes years, sometimes years to completely come off your infrastructure, not because data movement and the process is, but organizations, the larger the organization, the more processes and things that are in place that are complex. And allowing them to POC and see that they're still needed from a standpoint of helping move the data, helping keep things organized, helping the business intelligence teams get access to the data. It's not that they're going to be replaced from a whole. I mean, at some point, if you have a large infrastructure team, yeah, I would say that there could potentially be layoffs, and it's coming. And I guess I don't really have a way to talk about saving everybody, but to at least spend time and show them that it's not going to be a whole department that's going to be demised. It's more so a lot of IT teams are actually finding ways that those infrastructure people can be a part of the new process going forward, because there's still maintenance to be done in a PaaS infrastructure with different groups. It's just going to be different maintenance than just infrastructure per se. But that's a tough question. It's a hard one to advise. It'd be something that I would take the time to plan and talk to with whoever's helping you strategize and implement this, to kind of find ways to find other things in the organization that they can do within the new PaaS environment.
All right, I think that is, oh, wait, hold on, there's one more question, I believe. If a company started to use AWS as I believe that's LAAS, operational side of business, what could be a good argument to start using Azure Cloud for DW analytical purposes? Currently using DW on SQL Server on-prem.
Okay, so it's IS. So actually repeat the question one more time so I can, there was a lot to unpack there, so give me a second.
Yeah, no problem. If a company started using AWS as IaaS on operational side of business, what could be a good argument to start using Azure Cloud for DW analytical purposes? Currently, DW is on SQL Server on-prem.
So, and I actually, and that's what I thought. Okay, I actually talked to a lot of companies that do use Amazon from an IaaS perspective. It's what they grew up with, and it's where they were comfortable. And for them to change to Azure from an IaaS perspective, it just wasn't there, unless for some reason they were having to work with Walmart and Walmart forced them off. But that's another story. In the situation you're talking about, it's kind of laid out there in front of you, because Amazon, from a PaaS perspective, does have an environment that can stand up a business intelligence platform, but it's not as rich and detailed as the Microsoft environment. And that's where understanding the Microsoft Azure infrastructure can help you with that argument. Microsoft just has many more features and platforms that you could use versus Amazon. So Microsoft has kind of a one-to-one conversion with everything. So from a transactional database, in the PaaS, it has its version of SQL Server, Azure SQL. From a data warehouse perspective, it has its version of a traditional integrated data warehouse from Azure DW. From a NoSQL standpoint, it has it has Cosmos DB. It also has it has Power BI that can integrate with and can work in conjunction with even SSRS. It also has Machine Learning Studio. It has Azure Data Factory. It has all the components to build an end-to-end PaaS solution where Amazon, oh, they have components. A lot of their infrastructure from a PaaS perspective requires them to integrate with certain partners to make them most effective to get the best of breed. Where Microsoft has very capable, that will challenge anybody with best of breed technologies to work together. And if you really break down the Microsoft environment to your higher beings to show what they have and how much more they have than Amazon from a PaaS perspective, I think you'll win that argument.
All right, I believe that is, let me double check here. Make sure it's the last question. Yep, that is the last question. Looks like we have here. We'll give a few more seconds just to see and make sure no one else has any more questions. All right, it looks like we are good. All right, everybody, I just want to thank you, David, again so much for hosting. Great information. For those of you who are wondering, you will receive a recording to this this webinar in your email tomorrow, probably like around noon or 1. If you guys have any questions before then, please feel free to reach out to David or myself. And like I said before, check out Azure Data Week. You can go to azuredataweek.com. Tons of great information. If you guys have any kind of Azure questions, want to get to know a little bit more about Azure, tons of great information. So guys, don't miss that conference. It starts Monday, October 7th. So do not miss it. Like I said, visit azuredataweek.com. I will put it down here in the chat. But like I said, thank you guys so much for attending. And David, again, thank you so much for hosting. We really appreciate it. You guys have a wonderful day.
Yep, thank you.
Right.